Rhonda is the President and Vice Chancellor of Victoria University, which is a university within the University of Toronto. It's a very complex relationship, something that most people don't really understand. So maybe Rhonda can explain that relationship for us. So thank you very much. Over to you, Rhonda.
Thank you so much. Thanks to you, Keith, for the invitation, and thank you for the audience for joining to listen to this really important conversation that we're about to have. So, as Keith said, I am President and Vice Chancellor of Victoria University. Victoria University probably is the oldest university in the panel today. It was established in 1836, which makes it 189 years old this year. It was actually the first university that was chartered and has an act within the University of Toronto system. So it is the oldest. And that Victoria University actually was a standalone university and remains a standalone university to the University of Toronto. Our relationship is federated. So we think of ourselves as University of Toronto as a complex that is made up of actually 4 different universities. We each have our own boards, we have our own endowments, we have our own physical infrastructure, and we coordinate across with each other on some of the academic teaching and learning. And in my case, I have 2 colleges within Victoria University. The undergraduate college is Victoria College, and that one is where we have a relationship with the University of Toronto across all subject areas, students, and there are about just a little over 4,200 students who affiliate with both the University of Toronto and Victoria University, and we think of them as dual citizens. So they get the best of both by being able to have that affiliation. We also have a graduate college called Emmanuel College, which is based on multi-faith theology and has been a long-standing part of the university. And we have graduate students who study psychospiritual care and go on to be psychotherapists who work in faith-based and secular organizations like hospitals. We also have people who go into Masters of Divinity and PhDs who can go into practice in temples, mosques, and so we have a Buddhist stream, a Muslim stream, and a Christian stream with some Jewish academics as well within the Emmanuel College. So we are quite large. We occupy about 163 hectares in Midtown Toronto, which those of you who know Toronto, it feels like downtown, but it's not. So we are just on our north border is Bloor Street, if you're familiar, and then on our south we have the Queen's Park. So we're very close to the seat of government here in the city, and so that's been very important for me as I go through things like capital planning that require city regulations and city approvals to be able to just step out and cross the grass and get to Queen's Park has been useful. A little bit more about the university. As I said, we cover all of arts and science subject areas within the Victoria College. And that includes social sciences, natural sciences, humanities areas as well. We have 14 buildings that I look after here on the campus. And we have a staff complement of about 495 or thereabouts. And as I said, quite a significant faculty complement as well, including Victoria Fellows. On the academic side, we do have some of the most excellent students that come through both systems at Victoria. You might have heard today, there was actually an announcement this morning that the incoming University of Toronto president is Professor Melanie Wooden, who is the Dean of Arts and Science at U of T. She's a Vic alum. So we at Vic are celebrating her ascendancy. Like Paloma said, she will be the first woman president of University of Toronto. I am the first woman. Actually, I am not the first woman at Victoria. Victoria was a bit more progressive. So I am actually the 3rd woman at Victoria, but the first Black woman president in Canada. So that's where they first come in. There are 11 Rhodes Scholars for Canada annually, and these are our students who go on to study graduate work at Oxford University. It's a huge honor, and 2 of them are from Victoria University this year. So 2 out of the 11 in Canada come from Victoria University, and that just to give you a sense of the caliber of our students. And the last thing I'll say is, as an academic myself, my area is emerging technology and cognition. I hold a Canada Research Chair, which is, there's 1 chair for any particular area, and mine is on tactile interfaces, communication, and cognition. So my area is very close to AI at the moment, so I'm called the AI president at the moment. And I am still an active researcher with a research lab publishing on large language models. And I just did a few papers on some things to do with the Caribbean, how we speak in the Caribbean and how we write, and how AI is treating with non-standard forms of English in its computation. And I'll stop there and we'll move on to the other panelists.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Rhonda. Maybe we need to invite you for our next panel, which is going to talk about AI and education as well. So I wasn't aware that you were so well involved in this area of digital transformation and so on. Next is Grant Cornwell, who I've known for a very long time. And Grant has been one of my, I would almost call him one of my mentors, and one of the people who I bounce ideas off of. He is the president of Rollins College, which could almost compete with Victoria College in terms of age. So Grant will give us some ideas of what's happening with Rollins. So over to you, Grant.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you for this opportunity, and greetings, colleagues. And yes, Keith and I would say we've been creative collaborators for a couple decades, just mutually exchanging ideas about innovation in a global context, and it's been very fruitful for those years. So I'm currently the president of Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida, which is in the center of Orlando, a dynamic global city growing by leaps and bounds. This is my second presidency. I've been here 10 years. And just a little bit about Rollins College. Keith was right. This is probably the second oldest university on the call today, because Rollins was the first institution of higher education in Florida, founded in 1885, at a time when really Florida was in an early stage of formation. And I think a couple important things to understand in terms of context and where my answers will be coming from. The first is to say that Rollins College is a private liberal arts college. And in the US context, as you well know, but I'll just say it, there's the state university systems with all the flagship research R1s and also the community colleges throughout the nation. It's a huge and really quite dynamic and powerful system. But right alongside it is the private university sector. In students and in the public mind, they might not make a distinction, but certainly from where I sit and in terms of governance, especially these days, there's a tremendous difference. For the last few years, I've been reminding our stakeholder groups that we're not only private, we're not only an independent university, we're a fiercely independent university. So though we do our work in the context, in the national and state context that's highly ideologically pitched right now, I remind my faculty as often as I can that we uphold standards of academic freedom and freedom of inquiry, and that the faculty has the authority over what is taught and how it's taught at Rollins College, and that will persist, even maybe at some risk. And if folks are interested in that, I can talk about the risk profile right now with the anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates coming out of the federal government. Just by way of a quick anecdote so you know where I'm coming from. This is the second time around for us in Florida, because 3 years ago, Governor DeSantis put out a mandate to all state universities and colleges that they had to eliminate all DEI programs, policies, and positions. And at that very moment, I was bringing forward a strategic plan for Rollins to the board for their approval in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what I said to my board is this was not ideological resistance, that the plan I was presenting was a plan for relevance, because the students that we are teaching are increasingly diverse. We're over 20% Hispanic, over 35, 40% students of color, 10% international. And the case I made, which is the truth, is that unless we remain sufficiently agile so that students from all the backgrounds that we embrace here can thrive at Rollins, we are on a path towards irrelevance. So we have stayed the course on that, and that is proven interesting at times, and I can talk more about that if you like. The last thing I'll mention is, in a very timely way, 2 weeks ago, we had a national conference on liberal education and the reproduction of democracy at Rollins. And we planned this probably a year ago. And I reached out to my Rolodex of higher education association presidents and leaders and told them we were having this conference. And within 24 hours, every person I asked said, we'll be there. If this is what we're talking about, we'll be there. And it was a very heady, very interesting conference that was themed around the ideas of John Dewey, the American philosopher, who actually came to Rollins in 1932 to help the faculty reform the curriculum and make it more relevant for an education for democracy. This was a reprise of that conference, proved to be very interesting. So that's all I'll say by way of introduction, Keith, and I'll kick it back to you.
Okay, thanks very much. That's excellent. I really like that term, plan for relevance. And which takes me to Antonio. Antonio Carmona Báez is the president of University of St. Martin, whom I met a few years ago. In fact, if I recall, it was before I was president of COSTAATT, and then we met again subsequently. And we've signed an MOU with your university. And so we are planning to enhance our relevance as Caribbean institutions. Antonio, you're the closest to us. You're based in the Caribbean. Tell us a little bit about University of St. Martin and your role.
Sure. Good day, Brother President Nurse and colleagues and all those listening in. Yes, the University of St. Martin was established in 1989. Last year, we were celebrating our 35th anniversary. It is the smallest university in the Kingdom of the Netherlands, serving approximately 300 students per year. It is the first liberal arts institution within the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and also the first English language tertiary institution within the Kingdom of the Netherlands. But if you could tell by the spelling of our institution, we are an institution that serves, it's the sole institution of higher education and research serving the people of the island of St. Martin, both north and south. North being the French territory, collectivité, and the south, so-called country St. Martin within the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Since 1989, or in 1989, we were established mainly as a training center for the managerial class for the burgeoning tourism sector, hospitality sector. And since then, we've evolved, adding new degree programs, starting with education, but then in other areas, even micro-credential certificates, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, and together with other institutions, we offered bachelor and master's degree programs. In terms of research, in 2001, we established our St. Martin Science Research Institute, where we invite researchers from other institutions, as well as from the region, from the Caribbean region, where we concentrate our efforts on climate change challenges, policy, food security, public health, And recently within our program's expansion, we've added information technology, networks, social work, and also performing arts. What more can I tell you about USM? The history of USM, the shortest, perhaps the shortest history here represented in terms of institutions of higher education, is what is unique is the continuous collaboration that we've had with other institutions of higher education within the region, namely with the University of the Virgin Islands. More recently, as Dr. Nurse mentioned, we signed an MOU with COSTAATT, and we have good relations with institutions throughout the Kingdom of the Netherlands, with our sister institutions, the University of Curaçao, the University of Aruba, Instituto Pedagógico Arubano, and then a number of universities and universities of applied sciences in the Netherlands, in Europe itself. Lately, we've become very more relevant. We had to make ourselves more relevant not only on the island of St. Martin, but also for other smaller islands around, or islands around St. Martin, including Anguilla, Ceiba, Sint Eustatius, those particularly, especially the last two being also part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Our student body is very diverse. 50% of our student population are not Dutch or French citizens. This means that the majority of our students are working during the daytime, and therefore most of our courses are offered from the afternoon and throughout the evening. That is the University of St. Martin in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you very much, Antonio. You're operating in a small state context, an island context, so that's a little bit different from your other panelists. But I want to go quickly to Paloma. Recently, Paloma, as I indicated, we had a visit from COSTAATT. And what's striking about Guyana, which everybody's talking about, is that Guyana is the fastest growing economy in the world because of the oil and gas exploration. And recently, it was announced that by the government of Guyana that they were going to be granting, free tertiary education at University of Guyana. Yes. We know what that sounds like in Trinidad and Tobago. We used to have something like that. Being a petro state as well, hydrocarbon economy. So talk us through what are the dimensions of that? What do you see as some of the critical both opportunities as well as challenges associated with this scenario of so much financing, particularly for tertiary education in Guyana?
Well, first of all, it's not so much financing for tertiary education. It's not so much at all. We're still unable to get from the state at this point everything that we need. So there are gaps still. But let's talk a little bit about historically. This is not the first time Guyana has experimented with free tuition-free education. From the 1970s, late 1970s to 1990. Early 1990s, we did have free education because it is enshrined in our constitution that we should have free education from nursery to university. But then when the countries began to really struggle financially, we brought in what we call a service charge, right? Which is euphemistically still trying to preserve the idea that tuition in the constitution, that education would be free at university level, but they brought in a service charge, which was pegged at $1,000 US a year per student, which is really not a tuition fee, right? Anyway, so now when COVID hit and I became vice chancellor, we had some serious decisions to make as an academy, as the university, as to what was to happen with those thousands of students. At the time, we had 6,000 students who were enrolled, but who were losing their jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And the university took a decision that any student who could not pay but still, we would still allow them to continue and to graduate. But they, at the time, had to sign a payment agreement. But we allowed them to graduate. And so we kind of did that for the last 4 years. And then the government, the government was promising this all the time. So they have now made good on their promise. And from January 1st, 2025, we have tuition-free education. This is not a simple thing, as you know, because all kinds of questions. The first thing is a distinction between, what's free and what's not. Because as you know, there are a lot of hidden charges, needs, etc., in a university. So that's the first thing that we've clarified. The first effect of that is that we've had to push our application call back by over a month. Because we're trying to kind of work through all our policies, our systems, our students' record management system to take out the charges that would be there or not. So there's a lot of back-end work with regard to that. We also have to deal with the question of now, how do you address equity and inclusion? Because in the past, students who could pay, that was once they met the eligibility requirements, once we had space and once they could pay, they could be let in. But now you have a state that is paying for the tuition of basically everybody you let in. And so the question of how we address equity and inclusion in a country that has 10 regions and which has in the past seen over 70 to 80% of our students coming from coast. So 5 of those 10 regions. Now we had addressed this before. Since 2019, we had created a policy called the Policy for Underserved Communities, where we would give them a different kind of ranking criteria. They still had to meet the eligibility requirements, but they had a ranking criteria. Now we have to expand that across the country because it was 5% at the time. Now we have to do that, and that's what we're working on. The other thing is what is expected in the literature is you expect a larger number of applicants, and we only have that much space, right? But the online possibilities of expanding to online offer us in some disciplines the ability to create more students and to take in more students. But of course, if you take more students into service them, you have to have some back-end expansion. You have to have more tutors, especially if they're online, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this is complex. And to the point of whether or not we were planning for increased space, infrastructure, but we didn't get that money in this budget, right? Because if you're going to bring more students from far-flung areas, like that are, 2.5 hours flight from one area to the next, that's how far. Big Guyana is huge, right? You have to talk about dormitory spaces, student supports, staff, and all those kinds of things. So it's not a simple thing to have to manage. But my own personal view of this is that we came through COVID, we retooled ourselves, we responded, we created a lot of the policies that we can now kind of inflect what we're doing for free tuition. And it is, I think, going to be an interesting moment. It does offer, of course, what I consider opportunities for many people who would not have had them. And we're delighted to be able to do this because we are a state university. But at the same time, if you look at the literature, sometimes because of the requirements, the entry requirements of universities, many students who might be most in need might not actually be able to access these goods because just the requirements for getting into university are sometimes prohibitive for them. So we're also spending a lot of energy, and this is what we would have talked about, Keith, on our Institute for Distance and Continuing Education to expand their offerings to allow students who are missing, something to kind of upscale and to also focus on other things which allow students to earn and learn. Because many of the students are actually in situations where they want to progress, but because they have to, their families expect them work to contribute to the family, we have to consider that. So the last thing I'm going to say, because it's a lot, is, you know, we've had scholarship programs, for instance, where persons were sponsoring tuition for students, and now they would want to withdraw those and withhold those, and we say no. Please turn those into bursaries, because students still need things. They still need books. They still need, you know, food. And many of them, if they're from hinterland areas, still need to send money back to their families so that they can focus and stay in university and study, right? So it's not an easy thing, but it's wonderful. I'm a product of free education. Up to my first degree, I came all through university, all through school, and came for my first degree to University of Guyana. And so I understand completely and totally how transformative that can be if handled well. And I'm going to
Thank
stop
you
there.
for that. Yes, thanks for injecting also the personal dimension. I like your point about, you know, creating these mechanisms for inclusion. Mhm. And it's also dealing with the reality for most students. So same here at COSTAATT, a large share of our students are adult learners, and they have to earn and learn at the same time. And this is becoming a requirement almost everywhere in higher education. So I want to turn to Rhonda. Of course, I want to ask you the AI question but I also want to talk about, you know, Rhonda, you are in Toronto. Toronto is becoming increasingly a global city with diversity and so on. But it becomes a magnet for all kinds of industries. How are you responding to those demands? And maybe you could just inject a little something about the AI. We'll invite you back to do a fulsome treatment of that when we do our AI panel on education. But give us your insights into how you think education and higher education is playing this critical role in terms of transforming even a city as big as Toronto into a global player.
Thank you so much. And I'd be happy to come back and talk. I'm always happy to talk about AI and the work that we have been doing. In terms of, you know, you talked about the diversity in the city of Toronto. For sure, Toronto is probably what I would actually call a hyper-diverse city. I have lived in other large cities before, New York, London, and so forth. But Toronto certainly, I think, has the most in terms of how many different people are in one place. So at Victoria, in our student body, we have about 30% of our students are international, and they come from 50 countries around the world. So, you know, trying to make sure that you create an excellent student experience for that variety of people, you know, taking into account that their customs and values may be different from each other and their upbringing may be different, means that we have to put a lot of effort into our onboarding and our orientations. Recently, we've actually changed at Victoria to offer 2 orientations. So we do the usual domestic, international, and so on in the beginning of the academic year for the first years. But we have a new thing we're calling a reorientation that happens in January. And that allows students to really come back now that they've been, you know, around for a few months, to re-engage with us and to now ask questions that they hadn't thought about before, but now that they are on the ground, they get a chance to realize. It also supports our students who have accessibility needs, those who have cognitive and other kinds of learning experiences, and it gives them a chance to settle in, to see what it's about, and to re-engage with our student advisors and our student support systems to help them make sure that they will have the best journey in their academic life. So that's one thing. We are using AI actually right off the bat. We are starting to use AI in our recruitment of students. We are using it right now. I have a huge data analytics project on within the university where we are gathering data across all the units. So that includes not just our academic units, but also finance, our back office operations, HR, even on our infrastructure and sustainability sides. And what we're doing with the data is we're using AI1 to help capture all the policies we have within the university. And I'm sure all the people on this call know that policies can run away at a university, and you can find little small policies that maybe contradict each other across different parts of the institution. So we have, in the last year, done a policy gathering exercise to find all the written and unwritten policies that exist in the university, and we used AI to do this. And we then use human intelligence to pass this information, and we're using AI to help format the policies into consistent and recognizable formats so that people can easily understand the different policies. AI is also helping us identify areas of overlap and contradiction within our policies. So that's internally. We are using AI also in our operations on communication with prospective students, but also understanding that most prospective students who are applying are using AI in their statements. So I have recently spoken at the Ontario University Registrars Association, which covers a large number of universities in Ontario. And I'm on record as saying that I think we just do away with personal statements now, because we may as well assume that they're all being assisted through AI. And I did some live demos in front of the group to challenge them to give me questions they thought would be harder for AI to respond to. And they were, blown away by just how easy and how compelling AI can take on any question asked. And so I've written in the Toronto Star, which is a very popular newspaper here in Canada. I have written as early as 2003, saying that it's time for higher education to come to grips with AI and realize that we have to, really interrogate our assessment tools and our assessment practices. And there's no real point in trying to identify people, to try and find students using AI who are using AI. We could do that, but we have to think, what are we preparing students for? And when they graduate, they go into a world where they will be expected to be discerning and analytical and critical, and be able to effectively use AI in their jobs. And if part of our role is to train the next citizens and the next workers, then we need to make sure we're training them accurately on these tools that they will be expected to have facility with when they graduate. And so I've also written to the Hill Times, which is an Ottawa, very boring, but Ottawa-based governmental newspaper, to talk about the need for regulation in AI. I'm a telecommunications engineer by training. I have never in my life advocated for regulation of technologies, but this is one technology that I recognize needs some guardrails. And I've been supporting and offering my support through Universities Canada, which is a group of the 97 universities across Canada. I am the chair of the Education Committee, which looks after AI, also looks after EDIA, by the way. So that's another interesting topic we could talk about. But we've been looking at what are universities' responsibilities and how do we handle, how do we best make use of, and how do we best train our students in a world where AI is not going away, but is going to be a fundamental part of the future of our graduates.
And Rhonda, just before I go on to Grant, just recently you were sharing with me that you either the new chair or soon to be chair of CCI. Explain to us what CCI is.
No, that's wonderful. And I was hoping to get a chance to pitch CCI. So thank you, Keith. So CCI is the Canada Caribbean Institute, and it is a non-partisan collective that brings together the interests of both Canadian and Caribbean higher education institutions. That would include colleges and universities, private and public. And what we're looking at is to really create the best avenues for collaboration across Canada and the Caribbean to advance very important social, but also environmental and economic issues and interests that are aligned across the Canadian and the Caribbean regions. And I think there are opportunities for us to capitalize on the current moment that is happening with that Grant is well familiar with in the US, really gives us an opportunity to come together even more significantly across Canada and in the Caribbean. There's long-standing relationships between Canada and the Caribbean. We are looking to deepen those, both on research, academic, and on student opportunities, but also to support CARICOM and other economic regional initiatives. And you know, we are already tied through banking and telecommunications and other things. We're trying to create deeper relationships, and I invite any of the institutions listening today that are not part of CCI to investigate CCI as the incoming co-chair. There's one chair in Canada and one in the Caribbean. And we are working together. The conference, there's a conference annually. The conference the last conference, which was late last year, was hosted in Canada at McMaster University, which is currently holding the co-chair. But the next one will be in the Caribbean, so we alternate. So the next conference will be in the region. I don't think we have decided where yet. The one last year was focused on climate change and the impacts of climate change within the Caribbean and in Canada, and trying to bring together researchers across our regions to focus on a very critical issue. And these are the kinds of issues that we are looking at within CCI.
Great. Thank you very much. I want to switch quickly to Grant. When I visited your college, Grant, what was really striking was this interesting business model that you have. You have a hotel on your campus that's owned and run by the college, but you utilize some of the funds to facilitate this diversity issue that you were talking about earlier. So you touched on it, but I want you to maybe link this to, you know, how do we make sure that our economies and societies are both just, but also, you know, ensure that they are competitive, and how higher education plays a critical role in this regard. So, I mean, Florida is one of the fastest growing states in the United States. Florida is really almost the center of the Latin American and Caribbean economy. So we do rely on Florida as being an engine of growth. So, and you are smack dab in the middle of it. Orlando and adjacent areas are probably the fastest growing areas in all of the Americas.
Yeah.
So talk us about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Keith. I want to make a couple of comments first. Listening to you and listening to Rhonda, I'm sitting here thinking, how can I situate Rollins College in Canada and the Caribbean? Because, I mean, right, Florida is all that, but actually, if I could imagine Rollins in Canada and the Caribbean, I would be okay with that. I also want to just make a quick comment on what Rhonda was saying about AI, which I think is so insightful and exactly right. You know, when somebody turned on the switch of ChatGPT, the faculty at Rollins first took on that posture of, we have to police this, we have to push it back, you know, academic integrity is at risk. And honestly, that lasted about 2 weeks, and they said, okay, that's just a bankrupt posture to take, because what it would do is that it makes every student a suspect, and every faculty member a police officer in every assignment. And that is not the relationship that is conducive to learning. And the faculty since, and you know, faculties all sometimes can be known not to be very agile, but they totally pivoted and have embraced AI. And they realize that to embrace AI, they have to go all the way down to the bottom of their learning objectives. And they have to re-ask, what am I trying to convey in this course? What are the knowledge and skills that I'm trying to develop in students? And then how can I develop them assuming everybody is using AI all the time, because they are? And what's happened is that the faculty are now reporting that what they're learning is that they can go farther faster because students are using AI. And the questions can become more sophisticated, the research can become deeper. And so I just think it's a very exciting time. Sorry for those two digressions.
No, that's critical. Yeah.
Yeah.
Enjoy that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Rollins being a private college, American education has a very opaque business model of high price and then high discount, a very high sticker price, and then we give away a tremendous amount of financial aid. It's very difficult for families. I think I and every other president wishes we could just change that, but that's what we're saddled with. So 95% of the students at Rollins College get financial aid. So 5% pay the full cost of tuition. There's another 10, 15% that don't pay anything at all to come here. And everybody pays something in between. It's more like pricing airline seats than it is, having a sane business model. But what that means is, if you look at the demographics of our students, both international and national, we know that wealth has, over the last 2 decades at least, has been concentrated more and more in the economy. And therefore, there are fewer and fewer prospective families that can pay the full cost of attendance. And again, if we're going to remain relevant, we have to be able to how to offer a Rollins education to make it accessible from students from any socioeconomic background. And we can't just keep putting it on increases on tuition. We can't put the burden on families anymore. So what Rollins has done is we've really developed alternative sources of revenue by essentially going into business in the local economy. So we own $200 million of commercial real estate that directly supports the operating budget. We own a boutique art hotel where it's a nonprofit hotel where 100% of the margin directly funds scholarships that wouldn't be able to afford to attend Rollins otherwise. And Keith will tell you, it's not like a Hampton Inn or a Holiday Inn. Condé Nast ranks it the #1 hotel in Florida some years, #7 in the country. So it's a very high-end boutique art hotel, which fits our mission and really helps with the operating budget. So I just think that, at least in our sector, colleges and universities have to figure out other ways to afford our mission that doesn't put the burden on our students and our families.
Yeah, great. Which takes me to Antonio. The fact that you're operating in a small island with 2 languages, you're part of the Dutch Commonwealth, if we could call it that, very dynamic political space. Talk to us a little bit about how, from a Caribbean country perspective, you're grappling with all of this.
Yes, and not only a Caribbean country, but a very small Caribbean country, and a very complicated political space, as you've indicated. I live about 3 miles from the university, right by the border. And on one side of the border, you're in the European Union. On the other side of the border, you're not. But you're still a citizen, or you're still a resident of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. And so, navigating that has been, one of the challenges, but is also proven to be beneficial or advantageous as well to the institution, precisely because what I was alluding to, because of the collaboration that we have with other institutions of higher education within the Caribbean part of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, as well as within the region generally. And that's just thanks to the population demographics. As I mentioned earlier, the entire Caribbean is represented in St. Martin. And so from our student bodies, but also from our instructors, we have these direct contacts with University of the West Indies, with the University of Puerto Rico, with other universities, University of the Virgin Islands, I already mentioned. one of the things, you mentioned small island, we all talk about small island development states, and then there's this debate, should we talk about development states? Definitely USM is a development university. It's a university that is dedicated to the social, economic, and cultural development of St. Martin, the island of St. Martin. And when we're thinking about AI, artificial intelligence, we're thinking, of course, about ethics. We implemented our policy earlier this year, just this now in 2025, something that we've been working on for a while. I'm really grateful for our Dean of Academics, Dr. Gail Rigobert, who's originally from St. Lucia and former Minister of Education in her country. And she was a pillar in the formation of the Global South AI Summit that was held last year. And I think that event was very important. Together with other similar events and discussions and dialogues in the Caribbean, especially because, we think about AI, we think about technology, advancements in technology as things that are simply imposed upon us and that we have to adjust. And what we're doing at USM is we're really looking at AI as something that we can contribute to. And I think that was the Global Summit was what was all about, how to influence, how to create our prompts, how to give a real Caribbean bent on prompts when you're using things like ChatGPT or so. And recently we've had we held a conference with different stakeholders from the community, from government, non-government organizations, students, faculty, and private business on the island. I think this was a very important panel discussion that we had. And the conclusion is that we should embrace AI without fear, critically, but without fear, and determine how it is going to continue or how it's going to help the university and institutions of higher education generally prompt social, economic, and cultural development in the region.
Thank you very much. We've had a few questions come in. Of course, they're all talking about AI. It's the flavor of the month. Well, it's a huge impact. I mean, what I found really interesting is the way in which in each institution, we're all grappling with both the challenges, but also the opportunities, and embedding both new policies and also utilizing it, as Rhonda indicated, in the back end. So Paloma has shared through the chat the fact that Guyana has an AI policy since 2024, soon after ChatGPT was launched. And so she could probably share with us some ideas about how that's been impacting. What I also would want maybe Rhonda to share a little bit more with us is often, for example, if you look at the literature on digital transformation and higher education, it's always talking about the classroom experience side of things. But as you indicated, there's this back end of how digital transformation is impacting the way we do business or the way we practice higher education as a business. So maybe she could share a little bit about that. So I'm going to go with the two ladies first, but just to say to everyone, we did recognize that this was going to be such a rich topic. We've extended our time till 1:30 p.m. So I hope some of the panelists could stay with us until then. We're going to try and address as many of the questions as possible. So one of the key questions that keep coming up in the chat is this issue about AI in the classroom, which I think some of you have already addressed. So I'll focus on Paloma and Rhonda first, and then we take it from there. So Paloma, tell us a little bit about your University of Guyana's policy and how you think it has impacted the way in which both students or learners and faculty have responded.
Yeah, so the first thing the first way in which it impacted was that we were not seeing legal threats anymore, because our initial policies did not speak to anything about AI. And so students who were using it in the first instance were saying, well, guys, you didn't say we couldn't use this. So how now you're giving us zero and saying we plagiarized, etc. So it took a lot of stress out of the system, except we basically, what we did is we put everybody in the room, students, staff, etc. And we said, look, how is this thing working? How is this going to impact you? How do you think it's going to work? And what are the equity issues involved? What are the ethical issues involved? And how do you grade somebody, for instance, who did not use AI and some who did? It still comes down to the matter. We have tools that we could check. Of course, everybody knows there are tools you could check to see if people were using AI. But we ask students basically to give us all their prompts if they're going to use it, if they did use it, to give us their prompts, to give us what was generated, and basically just to cite every single thing that came out of AI that they used. So we basically say, well, good, you can use it, but you need to use it responsibly, and you need to fess up. You need to say that you use it in this way. I think it has taken a good bit of the strife that initially, because we do believe that we should police people. And we talk nowadays about, in a very judgmental way, about cheating, right? Which I think somebody's talking about. This morning, I was talking to this conference about how we expect to assess in the same way that we've been assessing all these years, this whole totally new condition. All of these things that are changed, you have online students and people are still expecting them to come physically to do assessments because they want to watch them. Instead of us saying, look, we have to change the nature of assessment, we have to operate at a different level of Bloom's taxonomy. AI is giving us, and all these technological tools are giving us ways and means of accessing information, but we now have to help students to navigate and staff. We have to train our staff how to use them, because even when we buy the tools, sometimes the staff employ them very punitively. Like, so they will set the parameter at 90% or something to ensure that they catch students teaching. All kinds of things happen. Or sometimes it's just that we don't train. So we've invested a lot of time in training staff. We have our Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, and they continuously train staff, or our library trained staff. And we write specifically on our course outlines now exactly what is required, what our tools are, and if there's a situation where we have to adjudicate, then we have we've written into our policies now what kinds of bars and parameters that we need to meet in order to punitively address a student's work. But they also have responsibility. So it's a lot of training, a lot of dialogue, and a lot of pushback as well from people in the academy who really do not like this at all. They really feel like this is an abomination. We are dumbing down students. We are allowing them to cheat. We are, and I'm saying that it's an opportunity for us to ask students now to apply what they learn, not regurgitate what we think we were teaching them. So you're operating at a very different level of Bloom's taxonomy, synthesis, application, and those kinds of things. And so I think it's good. We are also at the university testing different and working on the research backend. So we deployed a system called Alpha. I think it was last year, in which we're looking at gaming technology for immersive learning for certain kinds of things, right? And so we're testing that as well. We're also working with younger people. So we have a program, I call it the 100s, the Razor program, with 100 students who are the best students in STEM. So we take them from 9 years old, we work with them for 5 years until they get into college. And we really are listening to them and watching how they're employing these technologies and so on, and really trying to understand how we can best invest not only in our teacher technology program, which we just started 2 years ago. So this is not only in our faculty of education, where teachers teach teachers, or where we teach teachers, but also how do teachers think about, work and use technologies in their classrooms and integrate technologies in a responsible way. So there's a lot of training, a lot of research, a lot of observation, a lot of patience that has to go into this. But I also say a lot of caution, because you hear conversations about, oh, well, we don't need teachers anymore, right? So we could, make all our students. And this is a very dangerous thing, because we know we need teachers. We know, what we do as well when we're, when nobody's watching, or if we don't have anybody, we need the interaction. So it is really about embracing what is there, not being technologically and technically averse. That's the fundamental thing. You're not afraid of this technology. Your purpose is to learn it, understand it, learn how to manipulate it in the best interest of the academy and those you teach, as well as the society. That's bottom line position that we've taken, right? And like I said, we have groups of people who totally reject this. And we have the early adopters, like everything else. And then we have those who say, okay, we're going to give it a try. But it was the same thing that happened, which is, during COVID, when we said everybody has to get online, because we were a face-to-face university mainly, right? People said, okay, well, when we get back to face-to-face, I'm going to come back to work. Well, guess what happened? Right? It never happened. So people had to adapt. And the fundamental question for us in this region, though, with regard to the use of AI, and those in, this would be, I guess, for our region, is the absence of of Caribbean and our kinds of data in those data sets. That's a big question. And it offers an opportunity for us to insist that when we set questions and work for students from this region, to go and make sure that they're citing sources or cases, or they're including experiences from our part of the world, so that there's not that blind side there. That's a major issue. And when people talk about ethical issues, they don't think about that. They think about the cheating part. They don't think about the exclusion of huge swaths of information, experience, and really identity and voice in that's in this technology as it is right now. And also the last thing, the cost of it, and the fact that so many, like 33% of the people in our region are not even online, right? So that's a problem. And then, of course, if we're going to employ these technologies, as we're realizing now, the cost of it's rising. We were hooked during COVID, and people said, okay, use the technology, use this platform, you don't have to pay. And now the prices for these licenses are going up every single year. And we're called upon to service this. So we have to address those things. And so the question of the entrepreneurial university, which is what Stuart was talking about just now.
Yeah.
Is it Stuart? Yes, Stuart. Can't see. Yes. And that's really an important conversation. And also how we're able to, one, invest our voices, our information, our identity, our content, our assessments, but also how we're able to somehow manage. And for Rhonda, for me, Rhonda's appearance here is marvelous, because this is a question: how do we manage to get these things? The question of what is the language of the future is a big one. Is it going to be English? It's going to be Mandarin, or is it going to be some computer-based language that kind of helps us all to understand things? So this is these are big questions. But to answer your question, I think I did that and then just added a few things. I'm very excited about this area myself, so forgive me.
And you introduced Rhonda as well. So over to you, Rhonda.
Thank you. I mean, I couldn't agree with what's being said more. Paloma and I both have been putting things in the chat just to draw people's attention to it. I have put in the two articles that I wrote for the public. I also have put a paper, and I want to celebrate COSTAATT's own graduate, Dr. Samantha Jackson, who is working with me in my lab on the issue that Paloma is raising on, where is the content from people in the Caribbean in the data sets for the large language models and other AI tools as well. We have a paper that we've published together specifically looking at Trinidadian Creole and whether the algorithms are able to parse it. And I invite you to read it. It's an open source article, so anybody can get access to it. We have 2 more publications on the way on this topic. But what I can share in the cliff notes that we are finding is that because unlike other technologies, artificial intelligence is a learning algorithm, you can teach it to add in the perspectives and the voice and even the linguistic structure of people from the Caribbean. And we were able to, in a publication we're about to do, teach the LLMs how to read Trinidadian Creole and how to respond in Trinidad Creole, which would not have been in their data sets. We were able to prove that with very little cost, you can retrain the LLMs to not see our Creole and our languages within the region as improper English and attempt to correct it, but we can teach it the syntax, and then it can read, learn, and respond in our very same vernaculars, which makes sense, especially when you think of teaching children at a young age. The language professors, I'm not one, but the linguistic and language experts like Dr. Jackson have proven that children learn in their base home language first, and then you can teach them another form of English, versus what we do in the Caribbean, which is teach them English, hegemonic, North American or British English, while trying to teach them mathematics and other very complex ideas. First, we teach them in their home, then in their home languages, then we can use the LLMs to translate entire textbooks, right, in a matter of minutes, so that teachers and instructors are able to focus children on the learning content required in that time. So I wanted to go back to Keith asked me to verge a little bit. So a lot of stuff online. I put in even the University of Toronto. We worked together as part of our system to come up with the academic integrity guidelines on how AI tools and marked assessments come together. So I have shared that as well, because there were some questions in the chat on that. I wanted to go back to Keith's question, though, on the economics of universities and how the moment we find ourselves in globally, one with very, very difficult financial conditions across the globe, universities are hurting. For this, I can say that this is not a Caribbean issue. This is universal. Funding levels are at an all-time low in most places in the world. And I say most because I just came back from a visit to Hong Kong and China, and I will say that they are not starving their universities quite in the same way that we see happening in other parts of the world. But some of the issues that affect our bottom line will be things like the labor issues. So I've already seen unions and other labor organizations questioning how universities and colleges are using AI to replace instructors and TAs, right? So teaching assistants who help with marking and so on. Now there are AI tools that support marking and support with online. As Paloma said, many of us are looking at online and distance learning. AI tools, again, can play a part in just, doing teaching and learning, flipped classrooms, things like that, lend themselves to a more AI integrated curriculum. But there are labor issues here. So are these technologies taking jobs out of our sector? Are we making some of our staff and our faculty more precarious, particularly those who are already precarious in contract positions? And are we not building up the next cadre of academic leaders by not offering teaching assistantships in the volume that we have historically? So there are labor issues coming with the introduction of AI within our sector. Also, copyright issues are rampant at the moment. These large language models are greedy and agnostic of who has written it. So they are going after our our proprietary faculty's proprietary intellectual property and making use of them in creating courses that are 100% virtual and run by bots. So we have to look into issues of copyright for our intellectual property within the universities. And also there is a way that, we do public, even I am sure grants in the private university scenario, we still put out a lot of data online about our institutions. They are now tools that are basically trawling the internet and pulling our data out and making determinations and then flagging our institutions. For example, if a government I'm making just a generic statement, is interested in who has EDI or DEI policies or programs, we have recently in Canada been tapped from the federal governments south of our border, who are asking whether or not we give money to students who are from minoritized groups, and that the funding that they give those students to attend universities in Canada could be at jeopardy if we hold such programs. And we don't have to answer, they can find it all very quickly by using AI tools. So we are looking into how these create vulnerabilities that can affect our own financial standing and our ability to support students in the way that Grant has very kindly shared, which is very similar to all of us. There are many students who need help to get to university. A lot of first-in families still coming through the university and college systems. And if we don't have the security of being able to identify these students and support them, then we do put the mission of higher education in some jeopardy.
Okay, thanks very much, Rhonda. I'm going to switch the discourse a bit and ask Grant and Antonio to talk a little bit about the role of higher education in innovation. Because at Grant is playing a dual role, I think I could call it that. He's now also at your business school. It's at Cornwell Business School. It's one of the oldest business schools, if not the oldest in Florida. Very distinguished. So how are you leveraging something like a business school to create this economic transformation of the future? And similarly, I want to ask Antonio, given that you live in a tourist economy, tourism is the most important sector in the Caribbean economy. How is your institution leveraging its training in this tourism sector to dynamize it? Because tourism, as we know, in the Caribbean has very low value added. How are we helping our governments, but also our private institutions to increase that domestic value addition process? So, Grant, Antonio, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Keith. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to talk about the business of business schools because it's actually very interesting. And what we're finding is that we have several MBA programs, Master of Business Administration programs, and a Doctorate of Business Administration programs, and they're in our School of Business. And they are chugging along. We don't see growth in that area. We can hold our own because we're highly ranked, but we don't see growth in that area. Where we see growth, and what I'm directly involved with, is actually this is hot off the press. This isn't even a thing yet, but here's where we're talking about innovation of business models. We are developing an independent LLC as a school of leadership and management, and in that school of leadership and management, we are going to curate bespoke certificate programs and even degree programs for particular corporations or sectors. And the LLC will it'll be a nonprofit LLC, but it will be independent from the business school, because the business school has it can't move as fast as we need to move. We can't bring in adjunct faculty as faculty of practice. We can't have the flow through of capital that we need to put on these executive education seminars. And so we're creating a whole new entity to run these that will sit alongside the business school. It's actually very exciting. And we've already had a couple real successes. We held an Institute for AI and Real Estate Development, kind of a big topic in Florida. And it was packed and a revenue generator. And people found it fascinating because we could bring in the sort of professors of practice from industry, if you will, to run it, and then bring in those who wanted to learn it, be a venue for an event, an occasion, and a certificate, and then it kind of disperses. The other one that we have underway, which is fascinating, is there's an international organization called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And it's an old organization that is available as a resource for young CEOs. And it was actually started by a Rollins graduate many years ago. And we're doing a sort of reprise of that. And we're working directly with YPO to create an executive education track that will work with young presidents and give them kind of certifications and even eventually stackable certifications that become a degree that will be bespoke. It will be curated just for them. And it's going very well. So that's the new adventure, and we're finding it very promising.
Wow, that's great news. Bespoke education, particularly generating these higher level skills that people need now. They don't need it 5 years from now. It's too late. So
Right.
you're catching the wave as it's rising. That's really exciting. So Antonio, and then we're going to
Sure.
wrap after you, Antonio.
I was looking at the chat, and there are a lot of questions still about AI and higher education, and I'm just hoping
we're
that
going to do a panel on AI.
Yes, I'm
on
hoping that
April
at that
30th.
ACTE conference, there would be perhaps a push to have Caribbean institutions of higher education, tertiary institutions, perhaps have an annual conference on AI. I think that would be a good idea, just to keep up, to keep ourselves up on what's going on there. In terms of innovation in higher education, also business, and just to tap in a little bit on questions of the business model. Last year, I had the privilege of evaluating some programs at different universities in the Republic of Cuba. And what was interesting is that in Cuba, now you have the universities and they are creating businesses. Since 2019, there's the possibility to have small private businesses. And now the universities are at the forefront there, especially when it comes to patent medicines, when it comes to technology, when it comes to using AI during surgery or pre-surgery preparation. And I'm thinking, wow, if that is happening in a country where the state has been always very present, imagine in a hyper-capitalistic country, be it small, like St. Martin, the University of St. Martin should also be working on the small businesses training programs and research, whether it be in policy or it be natural science research, that can be implemented in order to start generating funds for the university. So that's something that we're looking into together with the board. And in terms of coming out or still being within the hospitality sector, seeing tourism as or living in a country where you have that single pillar economy, like you do in St. Martin and many other islands. Of course, the big question is, how can we talk about sustainable tourism? And then that is a course that is going to be of growing importance at USM, because of course hospitality was our founding program. So we're looking at sustainable tourism, but not just on how to greenwash tourism, the cruise industry, but also looking at heritage in St. Martin. And for that, we would need to look back into biodiversity. So sometimes we get caught up in these discussions about technology and how we can apply the technology, but we forget that there are some basic fundamental pillars within academia, within higher education that we need to look back to see how that can be innovated or renovated in order to answer the questions that we have today. So if you think about heritage and biodiversity, and that's another program that we're looking at here at the University of St. Martin, looking at having our students pay attention to the flora, fauna, of course, the geological structures of our island, the constantly changing geological structures of our island, and how that is going to impact the product that we have to sell, if we want to put it, for lack of a better phrasing there. And of course, that would have an impact on sustainable tourism or tourism, and possibly liberate ourselves from the hyper dependency on tourism, because let's we will talk factually by saying, okay, that we have a single pillar economy. The question is, how do we relieve ourselves from depending solely on tourism, and how do we make our what we used to think our product, how do we make that work to our advantage and for the betterment, of course, and health of our society.
Thank you very much, Antonio. This has been such a rich discussion. I mean, we've covered so many areas of really topical, critical issue areas. And I really want to thank our audience for raising good questions, some of which we've really tried to grapple with. Some we're going to have to leave for the next panel, which is going to focus on AI. And maybe we need to invite all you guys again, because I found that this interesting way in which you guys weaved the issue of AI as well as technological transformation into a whole range of areas was so compelling. So, Antonio, you raised this critical issue of how do we tap into, let's call it our intellectual property, things like our heritage. And that become the basis of our new competitiveness, if I could call it that, our new relevance, to use Grant's assertion about planning for relevance. So as institutions, this changing our business model to this entrepreneurial model, Grant talked about it, Paloma raised it, Rhonda is definitely embedded in thinking about that critical transformation. At COSTAATT, we are talking a lot about that same issue. The traditional sources of funding have shifted, not necessarily always in the best framework for us. So, but institutions all over the world in higher education are grappling with these issues. So Rhonda was quite useful in sharing her experience of being in Asia recently and seeing how they are transforming and utilizing higher education as a mechanism for innovation and economic competitiveness. So why are we not investing more in the bioeconomy and in the blue economy in the Caribbean? Linking that back to AI, how can we use the AI tools for us to shift more increasingly into these areas? Are we investing enough in digital entrepreneurship? That was the key question from this morning's launch of Trinidad and Tobago's e-commerce strategy by the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And I said to my colleagues who were there that we are under-investing in preparing the human resources to participate in this huge growth area, because it goes into so many areas, from cybersecurity to whether we actually have content to upload. And these are the roles that higher education has to play going forward. No longer are we just training for training's sake. We have to be engaged in dynamizing our economies and our sectors and preparing our populations for a more dynamic role, but also for a more engaged role, whether we're talking about the social equity issues or managing our planet's resources. So I want to thank you all for what has been fabulous. It's even better than I dreamt, and I'm a big dreamer. And I really look forward to coming to visit you guys again. I haven't been to Toronto for quite some time. I'm hoping to do that later in the year. Same for Florida, St. Martin, and Guyana. You're all welcome to come to Trinidad and Tobago. We want to say hello to Dr. Jackson, who is working with Rhonda, who's one of our graduates and alumni. So anytime you guys want to come and do some work with us, you're welcome to do so. But again, I want to thank the audience for their fabulous questions, some of which we've tried to introduce into the discussions. And so the Innovation Café series is just about this, stoking some ideas about where do we go next. So I really want to thank you all for your participation and contribution. Best regards, see you at our next session, which is going to be on April 30th, which is like 2 days after election. So we probably have a lot to talk about between Trinidad and Canada about election results. So best to you. Be well. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.